The year is 325 AD, and we find ourselves in the imperial palace in the city of Nicaea. Christians from all across the Roman Empire and beyond are gathering, the largest assembly of believers ever. Thousands of elders and ordinary Christians and over 200 overseers, leaders of their communities, are coming together.
Some of them have scars, missing eyes, lame legs. These are visible reminders of recent persecutions. These people are called the confessors, those who have endured tortures and time as slaves in the Roman mines because of their faith. Some have come from the deserts, having spent their lives praying in the caves of Egypt. Others are coming from across the Mediterranean, North Africa, Anatolia, the Middle East, Spain, Gaul, and even from Persia and Scythia. That's today's Crimea and wider Ukraine.
They're all here to resolve particular theological disagreements. There had been other disputes in the past resolved by these kinds of gatherings, but this time it's different. The vast assembly all suddenly rise. The Roman Emperor Constantine enters in purple robes and gold and precious stones. This is the Council of Nicaea.
100 years ago, Christianity was just another religion among many throughout the Roman Empire. How on earth did we get here? In this video, we'll explore the history of Christianity between the years 200 to 325 AD. We'll introduce you to the oldest known church building ever discovered and walk through the age of imperial persecution. Let's rewind.
240 AD. This is the first known church building ever discovered. A few days' travel from the city of Edessa in Mesopotamia, we come to the city of Dura-Europos in today's eastern Syria. This is one of the most eastern cities of the Roman Empire, where, just beyond the river, stretches the vast domain of the Persian Empire. This city is home to a large Roman military base and many temples, at least 4 to Zeus, 2 to the Babylonian god Bel, as well as a synagogue down the road. Impressive buildings. But amongst them, against the wall of the city, is a small Roman townhouse converted into a house church and used for Christian worship. This is the main hall. There's no altar. Christians are worshipping with their hands in the air in Jewish custom. They might well be singing songs from the Odes of Solomon, a collection of Christian hymns originally composed in Syriac in the 1st century. They could also be singing newer songs by Bar Daisan, one of the earliest hymn writers we know of.
Wait, what's Syriac?
Well, Syriac was a dialect of Aramaic, the language spoken by Jesus, and it became the key language of Asian Christianity from Syria all the way to China, still used by some Christians today in the Middle East. The community at Dura-Europos is diverse. There are Latin, Greek, and Syriac speakers, men, women, slaves, citizens, and probably also lots of Roman soldiers from the city's garrison. In their meeting, they read from their Bible.
Hang on, I thought Bibles were created later at some official meeting?
Well, by this time, there was already developing a strong consensus among Christians about which books were scripture. The 4 Gospels, the letters of Paul, 1 John, 1 Peter, and Revelation were widely accepted. Theologians and philosophers like Origen began to write commentaries on them, and an intellectual culture of debate began to emerge. In this church at Dura-Europos, they were also reading from a book called the Diocletian, which was originally written in Syriac, here read in Greek, and was a harmonization of the 4 gospel stories into one narrative.
That'd be useful.
This is how Christians here would normally worship, but today is a special day. The whole gathering is heading across the courtyard into a smaller room. There are no windows, and everybody is carrying lamps. At the end of this small room is a pool, a baptistry, the earliest baptistry ever discovered. All around the room, there are crude drawings and paintings. Again, some of the earliest Christian art ever discovered. Most striking, in the central image above the pool, a beardless youth carrying a sheep and guiding a flock down to a stream, the Good Shepherd. This image looks a lot like well-known Roman pictures of their gods carrying sheep. Christians were using the visual culture of Rome to represent Jesus' words in the Gospel of John, where he calls himself the Good Shepherd.
So that's not a picture of Jesus?
Not exactly. For the first few centuries, Christians didn't directly depict Jesus. They alluded to him with other stories. They reinterpreted the pagan stories in the light of Jesus. That is, until now. On the wall to the right of the baptistry, we see the first Christian images of Jesus himself, walking on water, healing the paralyzed man. Under all these pictures, the new Christians are baptized. They're probably thinking about Psalm 23, God as their shepherd who leads his sheep down to quiet waters.
That's beautiful. So what happened to this church?
Well, it only existed for 16 short years. In 256, the city was besieged by the Persians and it was buried by Roman soldiers who were reinforcing the walls of the city. It was preserved there untouched until it was discovered in the 1920s.
Oh, wow. So it's still there now?
Well, no. It was bulldozed by ISIS after 2011. Nobody's been back there since. But the paintings are preserved at the Yale University Art Museum. We don't really know what happened to the Christians there. The city was left completely empty after the siege, but they may have been deported further east to southern Mesopotamia, Iraq and southwest Iran, where there was already a growing local Christian community.
Well, the Persian takeover wasn't the only time Christians were caught up in imperial pressure.
What do you mean?
Let's talk about all the other Christians in the Roman Empire. By the year 200, Christian communities were everywhere, from Gaul, that's France, to the Kushan Empire, Afghanistan. They're getting along quite well with Roman citizens on the ground. They are neighbours, friends, and trustworthy citizens, and there is 50 years of relative peace. But it all changes in the year 250. All is not well across the Roman Empire. Rome is in civil war, and in the last 15 years, 7 Roman emperors have been killed by other Romans. Goths and Sasanians are at the gates, and there is massive inflation. Roman civilization is in crisis. The Roman Emperor Decius was determined to sort things out, and he believed that the gods were angry and that they needed to be placated. The gods had to be won back. But how? An empire-wide sacrifice to the gods.
What did they have to do?
There was an edict. Everyone, citizen, non-citizen, slave, child, everyone must go to a Roman temple, throw a pinch of incense, pour a dribble of wine, and eat a little bit of sacrificial meat. Then you would get a certificate to prove that you'd done it. Christians all across the empire were required to make this sacrifice.
That doesn't sound like a big deal.
Well, for Christians, they understood that doing even these small actions would be to worship, or to be seen to be worshipping the Roman gods. They just couldn't do that. And so this led to the most widespread and systematic persecution of Christians so far. Some Christians did just give in. Others bought one of the certificates, but many refused altogether. Those who refused were executed, tortured, or imprisoned. We know some of the key leaders who died. Origen, the theologian, was tortured and ultimately died of his wounds. Leaders in Antioch and Jerusalem died in prison, as well as Fabian, who was the leader of the Christian community in Rome.
Wow, brutal. But what about the people who gave in?
Well, there was some debate after Decius died the following year. Some thought that they were traitors who should never be allowed back into the church. But Cyprian, the leader of the community in Carthage in North Africa, argued that as long as they repented, nothing was beyond God's forgiveness. And that became the general position.
That's kind of beautiful. So after Decius died, was that it?
Things did die down, but low-level pressure continued for the next decades. And at the same time, Christians in Persia were also beginning to face pressure.
Wait, in Persia too?
Yeah, around the year 280, Zoroastrian priests, or magi, in the Sasanian Persian Empire were getting concerned about this new religious community.
Magi? You mean like the ones from the Christmas story when they came to see Jesus as a baby?
Quite possibly, but these ones weren't so friendly to Christians. They believed the world was locked in a battle between the divine forces of chaos and order, and they saw themselves as the defenders of order. To them, the new teachings brought by Christians were a force of chaos. They saw them as demonic, an existential threat to their civilization.
Wait, how do we know all of this?
The story of this persecution is written on a monument among the tombs of the Persian kings. Unfortunately, we don't know very much about what the local Christians experienced at this time, but the inscriptions tell us that the Zoroastrian chief priest, Kartir, oversaw the smiting of the Nazarenes, that's the Christians, as well as the Jews and Buddhists, along with destroying their meeting places.
Whoa, that's intense.
It is. But back in the Roman Empire, things were just about to heat up again. In the year 303, a new kind of emperor emerged, Diocletian. Unlike many of the previous emperors who were professional politicians, Diocletian was a hardened soldier from the Balkans, around Croatia. All the same social and political problems were raging again in Rome, but Diocletian had an innovative way to solve it. He broke up the empire to 4 co-emperors, all also Balkan soldiers, to rule it together.
So they turned the empire into a military dictatorship?
Kind of. But Diocletian, like Decius, also believed that they had to get the gods back on side. But unlike Decius, he believed that the Christians specifically were the problem. In fact, a later emperor said this: "Jupiter protects us, and all these recent disasters are because of the foolish and immoral people who are bringing the entire world to suffer."
He's talking about the Christians, right? That's not good.
No, it's not. Under Diocletian, Christians were forbidden to meet. House churches were pulled down. Their scriptures were burned. And remember, these were handwritten Bibles. They would have been people's most prized possessions. And Christians, especially those in the army or public office, were targeted. They were killed and tortured. Others were enslaved, imprisoned, or sent to the Roman mines.
Wait. How do we know all of this?
A lot of the details in this time were recorded by the first historian of the church, Eusebius. Eusebius himself lived through Diocletian's persecution and witnessed a lot of this firsthand. Even his friend and teacher Pamphilus was killed.
That's a lot of trauma.
It is. We don't know how far this persecution spread west, but there are stories of martyrs all the way in Britain, like St. Alban. St. George was also said to have died in the Middle East during this time.
You mean the one who killed the dragon?
Yeah, but that's a later story about him. We'll get to that. Anyway, Diocletian abdicated 2 years later, but the persecution still continued. What's amazing about this period, though, is that Christianity kept on growing.
While the emperors hated them, ordinary people were still quite attracted to this new faith. Christianity continued to offer the same attractions as the previous century: dignity to slaves and women, communal unity, and the intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually satisfying teachings and stories. But these were even more attractive because of how unstable the empire felt. Throughout this time, there was also a series of pandemics that swept through the Roman Empire. This is where Christians really came to stand out. Christians trying to be faithful to Jesus' teaching, to love their neighbor, decided to organize themselves to take care of the sick. They would tend to the dying, bury the dead, and cared for the poor.
One Christian leader in Egypt, called Dionysius of Alexandria, even wrote that many, in nursing and curing others, transferred their death to themselves and died in their place. Later, the Roman Emperor Julian even said that Romans should be more benevolent to strangers to try and compete with the Christians. He said it is disgraceful that the impious Galileans support not only their own poor, but ours as well. All men see that our people lack aid from us.
So Christians were dying of plague, but still growing as a faith, all the while experiencing violent deaths and persecution from the empire.
But suddenly, it all stopped.
In the year 311, one of the emperors, Galerius, dramatically switched his policy, declaring toleration on his deathbed. This persecution hadn't worked. The gods were still angry. Rome was still in turmoil. What was the point?
Meanwhile, one of the emperors based in Britain was consolidating the Roman territories back into a united empire. 2 years after Galerius died, this emperor issued the Edict of Milan, officially declaring toleration across the empire. His name was Constantine. And, even more surprising, this Roman emperor called himself a Christian.
Wait, so how did a Roman emperor become a Christian?
That's a story for next time.
Hi, I'm Dan.
And I'm Oliver.
And we're part of the Christian Story team.
So if you like this video, do give us a like and subscribe to keep up with what we're doing and help us with the algorithm. And if you know anyone who might also like us, give us a share.
We're also a crowd-funded non-profit and want to make everything we do available for free. So if you'd like to support us financially to make our next video or join us on our journey, use the link below or use this QR code somewhere here to go to our website, christianstory.com.